You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, Trump just verbally attacked Judge Engoron outside of his courtroom ahead of the start of the New York Attorney General's trial. What kind of impact will this have on his case?
Interesting question, because we already know that Donald Trump is pending a hearing in his federal prosecution in Washington, D.C. on October 16th to try to determine whether a limited gag order should be placed on Donald Trump. And here he goes again. I mean, attacking the judges in some of the most direct ways possible, saying he should be disbarred. He said some people say he should be prosecuted, and on and on. I think Judge Engoron, perhaps as early as tomorrow, will have a decision to make. Does he address this with Donald Trump, and does he try to limit his sort of reckless, inflammatory, and even dangerous rhetoric? I mean, we've all seen what happens when Donald Trump calls his supporters to action, like, hey, march to the Capitol and stop the steal. We saw the results of that with our own eyes. So I have a feeling Judge Engoron is not likely to just let this go, let it slide. He could say something tomorrow that could even include some kind of a narrow restriction on Donald Trump's speech.
Now, I know that you had brought up the fact that Trump is awaiting a decision on October 16th for the D.C. trial. Could Trump's actions in New York here have any impact on the judge's decision, Judge Chutkan's decision in D.C. back on the 16th?
Absolutely. So I think come October 16th, I'll be in the courtroom watching that hearing. I have a feeling Special Counsel Jack Smith will supplement the record that he has already presented to Judge Tanya Chutkan in his quest for a gag order, including things most recently like, by the way, Donald Trump has called for the execution of one of the witnesses who will be testifying against him, General Mark Milley. I have a feeling Jack Smith will say, and by the way, Judge, lest anybody think Donald Trump has learned his lesson or has been chastened, on his way into the Manhattan courthouse this morning, he said that people should, quote, go after the Attorney General, meaning Letitia James. So, yeah, I have a feeling Donald Trump is making it more and more likely that Judge Chutkan will act come October 16th.
Now, his theatrics aside, he made some claims that suggested he might be in the clear here because of the statute of limitations. Is that him just wish casting, or is there any merit to what he's saying?
It's a little of both. It's a whole lot of wish casting, but it looks like there may be an issue with respect to some of Trump's older fraud, dating back to, 2014 or earlier. It may be that he gets some limited relief, a ruling that would sort of cull out some of his earliest fraud. It will not impact, I think, the ruling at the end of the day, or the finding of Judge Engoron that he engaged in massive fraud year after year, indeed decade after decade, even if it proves that some of it is sort of beyond the reach of the case because it's too old and it doesn't survive the statute of limitations.
Okay, well, more broadly speaking here, was there anything remarkable in your opinion about how this trial is playing out now?
So one of the things I found really interesting was the opening statement by his attorney, Christopher Kise. Now, mind you, Brian, this is the same Christopher Kise who has already been sanctioned by Judge Engoron for his conduct in this case. He sanctioned Kise and 4 other Trump attorneys to the tune of $7,500 each. I don't know that makes an attorney swell with pride when a judge sanctions him for his conduct.
Yeah, it's probably one email out to the marks on Trump's mailing list.
But, part of what he said in his opening statement I found to be laughable. He said, we're going to present a witness to you, Judge Engoron, that will say, there really is no such thing as an objective valuation on a piece of property. Now, the reason I find that laughable is because, Donald Trump has been caught red-handed in his own financial statements, documents, and paperwork, putting one value on a piece of his property for the bank. I'm just going to make up the numbers. Hypothetically, he would tell a bank when he was seeking favorable loan terms that this is a really valuable piece of property. It's worth $100 million. And then he would turn around and that same piece of property, he might tell the tax authorities, oh no, this property really isn't much worth much, just, maybe $1 million. So please don't tax me much on this piece of property. That is not creative accounting. That is not something a witness can explain away by saying, well, there's no objective valuation that you can put on property. That is stone cold fraud, transparent fraud, obvious fraud, ultimately criminal fraud, but this is not a criminal case, it's a civil case. So, I sort of chuckled when I heard Attorney Kais say, we're going to present a witness who's going to say, don't pay any attention to the numbers because, you really can't place any objective value on property anyway.
Glenn, how long do you presume this trial will last now?
So Judge Engoron announced that he thought it could wrap up by the third week in December. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably an overestimate. Here's one thing I can tell you after prosecuting cases for 30 years. At the beginning of every case, both parties, the prosecution and the defense, give the judge an honest assessment, a best guess of how long they think the trial is going to last. And I can tell you, we are almost always wrong. Part of the reason is you can't account for a delay that might be occasioned by a juror getting sick, or maybe a witness gets an offender bender and is delayed. I mean, there are all sorts of things that happen in the real world that alter the trial schedule. Here is the thing that I have seen, though, over and over and over again. The defense will tend to overinflate, ironic maybe, given the nature of this case, overinflate the number of witnesses they are going to call. Letitia James told Judge Engoron she thought she may call as many as 53 witnesses. Donald Trump's lawyers said, Judge, we may call as many as 127 witnesses. There is a phenomenon here, Brian. The defense always wants to pad its witness list. We're going to do a quick criminal law class now. Why do they pad their witness list? Because as soon as they announce their name, they name their witnesses, their potential witnesses. Let's say they only name 10. Well, the other side, the prosecutors or the attorney general's lawyers who are pursuing this case will go to work and they will do a deep dive and investigate each one of those 10 witnesses. So by the defense saying, we're going to give you 127 names, in part, that's a bit of a snipe hunt that they have set the prosecutors on. So they may say they're going to call 127 witnesses. I'd be surprised if they called 27 witnesses, and that will ultimately reduce the length of the trial.
And does Donald Trump have to be present for every day of this trial?
He doesn't have to be. In a civil case, you don't have to be present. Of course, he didn't attend his own defamation trial, that was brought against him by E. Jean Carroll. And of course, he went down in flames in that case. I don't think he is attending this trial because he really has an interest in being there and seeing how the evidence plays out. I think he's going to sit there and use this as a vehicle to seek continuances in other cases. We've already seen him try to put off 2 scheduled depositions because he said, I have to be in my civil trial in New York. Well, no, you don't. But if he chooses to sit there like a bump on a log, which is pretty much how he sat there today, it will give him a built-in excuse to push some other court obligations further down the road.
Okay, let's end with this. I know we had been speaking a little bit about the money damages. Letitia James is seeking $250 million. How does what the prosecutor requests impact the judge's ruling here? Like, is her request for $250 million just a pie in the sky number, or is there some rational basis to what she's requesting? And how does the judge take that into account?
Yeah, great question. There's clearly going to be a rational basis. The attorney general will have run various numbers, see how much fraud they think Donald Trump perpetrated, see how much tax he failed to pay to New York City, New York State, ultimately even to the federal government, even though he's not on trial for violating federal tax laws at this point, though he may be soon. And then she'll come up with a good faith ask of the judge, but she will give a basis for why she said she's seeking at a minimum $250 million. And that will be a guide for Judge Engoron. Now, what I have found when I'm asking for a certain penalty, ordinarily it was a certain length of a jail sentence or a sentence to imprisonment, the judge will use it as the guide, but he or she will almost always sort of go with their independent assessment of what they think is the appropriate sentence, whether it is money damages or a jail stint. And, they don't often come down exactly where the prosecutor or where the attorney general comes down.
Okay. Well, obviously a lot to stay on top of in this trial as we're now underway in New York. So for anybody watching, if you want to stay on top of this trial and more, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.